Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Total video we're going to be discussing the Xbox One versus the PlayStation 4, and this comes to us from Infinity Ward. Mark Rubin has been interviewed and has said, and I quote, "There are things that we are not allowed to talk about." So it began by asking, the interviewer asked, why the PS4 version looks, and I quote, "so much better than the Xbox One." Mark Rubin said the only difference is the resolution. The TVs are different on some of them, in other words, some of the booths are using different television sets. But they both have different rendering engines, but they're as close as possible. It really comes down to the resolution. The Xbox One version, of course, is upscaled from 720p to 1080p, whereas the PS4 version is native to 1080p. But he's saying that's the only graphical difference. Mark Rubin also added, in regards to the PC version, that they've added some features that aren't available in next-gen consoles, and they've worked really closely with NVIDIA. They have new forms of anti-aliasing, which are really powerful, and they're not in the next generation. They've also got a fur shader on the dog and the wolves, and that means you have moving fur shaders. And also for the PC, there's what is known as the NVIDIA's Apex Turbulence Tech Engine, and that means you have smoke that actually wisps waves and moves out of the way of objects. Anyway, in regards to whether the next generation console simply can't do that, or whether it was a time issue, Mark responded, well, you can do almost anything, almost. Tessellation can't be done on current gen for the most part, as it's DX11. But we still could do it, but you'd get a frame rate of like 2. So that's what becomes the reason we do everything. The reason the Xbox One is 720, the reason the PS4 is 1080, is we're trying to have the game look as good as possibly can, and making sure we maintain our 60 frames per second. We maintain the latency and speed and things that people actually care about, even if they won't admit it. The thing that makes Call of Duty popular is how it feels, because of those priority. Now, the interviewer asked, and this question is fairly key, so the obvious assumption from all of this is the PS4 is definitely more powerful than the Xbox One. Is that true? Mark Rubin said, and I'm giving you guys an exact quote, the interviewer put in parentheses, he acts embarrassed, and then he says, "I can't answer that." Then the interviewer asks, "You can't answer it on a technical level, or because you're being diplomatic?" Mark responds, "I can't answer that." So the interviewer asks once again, "You can't say whether you're avoiding the question for diplomatic reasons." He's really embarrassed now, and he says, "I can't say anything." Even the attending, by the way, at this point, even the public relations guy is looking very uncomfortable and embarrassed. And he says, "It's very hard for us to be." And then the interviewer asks, "Are the console manufacturers leaning on you to avoid these questions?" In other words, he's asking, are they telling you cannot answer this stuff? And Mark speaks to the PR guy and says, "I don't know if..." And he says, "Yeah, there are things that we sign NDAs with the first parties, i.e. Microsoft and Sony, and there are things we cannot talk about." And then the interviewer presses even more, and he says, "So when John Carmack and Shinji Mikami say the Xbox One and PS4 were almost identical, is that something you could agree with?" Mark responds, "I'd say that's a bit inaccurate, but I won't be able to tell you any details as why. And that's for diplomatic reasons." And then the journalist asks, "I think we can all read between the lines, but that's absurd. How can you not expect any journalist, any reasonable journalist, not to ask these questions? That's what everyone wants to know." Mark is still extremely uncomfortable, probably more uncomfortable at this point. And then he says, "The key thing is we try to focus people away from that sort of thing and try to focus them on the fact the game is fun, no matter which platform." So he was then asked, "Do you think the next games you make will have so much of an obvious disparity?" And Mark said, "Unknown, but over time, if you look at the Call of Duty 2 compared to COD 4, there's a massive graphical difference. They look different, so I think we'll get better." But, the developer asked, will the same proportional gap always be there? Mark says, "I don't know. Until we get there, I honestly just don't know." To be not diplomatic or anything, We really don't know. We've done as much as we can the time we had, and that's it. Will they go off in the opposite direction? Who knows? But for this game, it is what it is. Then they were asked, do you think other people will have these problems? Mark responds, well, I think we've already said that, haven't they? Battlefield 4 on the Xbox 720, on the Xbox One is 720p, and 900 on the PS4. Titanfall is going to be 720p, so we're not the first to say 720 on the Xbox One, and that was pretty much the end of the interview. Now, there's a lot of analysis I could do on this, but you know what? I'm not going to in this video, and it's not because I'm being a bastard. It's because right now on Twitter there are massive arguments that are literally erupting. I've had a couple of people already messaging me them, and I think it would be unfair to you guys to give any speculation when suddenly there's an explosion. I mean, honestly speaking, and this is a quick aside from what I just said, but this is all what we've been hearing about for a while. It's ESRAM, it's most likely not helping matters. It's the DDR3, of course, as well, in conjunction with that. The ESRAM amount of memory combined with the lack of bandwidth from the DDR3. And, of course, it doesn't really require me to explain things such as the GPU. I think there are going to be other issues as well, but I think they're going to be popping up in the next couple of days because, honestly speaking, people are uncomfortable now. I've actually seen Twitter responses, and it's going to get a lot more juicy because people are starting to shrug off the NDAs and they're getting past it. And so I think over the next couple of days, I think we're going to have a lot of information. I honestly do. I think that developers are getting very uncomfortable here, and you can just hear it. You know, when you're looking at the interview, you could just see that this guy wants to say so much stuff. It's obvious that the PS4 is more powerful, and that's not being a fanboy, that's just looking at numbers. I mean, the Xbox One has what, let me just read it out, hang on, 56% less power than the PS4 in terms of raw T-flops. That's if you count the reserve being allocated to the operating system rather than the games. 48 texture units rather than 72, that's plus 50%. 16 ROPs versus 32 of the PS4. 64 compute queues versus 16 of the Xbox One. And I could keep going like this, but, you know, I don't think that makes the games on the Xbox One any less fun. I don't think that makes the Xbox One a worse system. I don't think that makes the Xbox One means it's going to have crap games. It just means that the system is going to be less powerful. Black and white. It's been the same in every console generation. The PS2 was significantly inferior to the original Xbox and the GameCube. You don't believe me? Look at, say, Resident Evil 4 on the PS2 versus, say, the GameCube, or Soul Calibur, which ran beautifully on the GameCube compared to the PS2. Another example, the frame rates on various titles, for example, Batman Arkham Origins, Grand Theft Auto 5, and so on, are worse on the PS3 than what it is on the Xbox 360. In other words, every generation, one console is inferior in one way or another. So I don't really think this is a massive big deal. One console is technically inferior. It doesn't mean that the console won't sell extremely well. It doesn't mean that the console won't do extremely well. Also, another point, it's still really early in the console generation, so it's possible they will get around the ESRAM issues and much more besides as they get more used to programming and more used to the APIs. But I'm going to not say much more on this subject because, as I said, Twitter and other things are literally exploding right now with responses. So I'm probably going to see you guys in the next couple of days. Obviously, we're also doing frame rate analysis now on consoles. So the next generation of consoles will not only have graphical comparisons being done on it by RGT, our channel, but also frame rate analysis as well. So anyway, hopefully that's something for you guys to look forward to. I'm going to get going, so I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.